Encouraged by the losses sustained by Napoleon in the invasion of Russia, a new coalition forms against Napoleon. And so you've got Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, Great Britain, Spain, and Portugal all allied together against Napoleon in 1813. And Napoleon, he's able to bounce back a little bit from this disastrous attempt to invade Russia, but suffers his first really significant defeat in a land battle at Leipzig in 1813. And there were 90,000 casualties total in that battle, a really horrific and bloody battle in the Napoleonic Wars. All right. In the beginning of 1814, Napoleon is retreating back into the heart of his empire, into France. He's got about 70,000 soldiers left, and he is facing 3 times as many soldiers from the Allied coalition that are surrounding him. The British pushing in from the south, and other coalition forces, Prussia and Austria, pushing in from the east into France. Okay? And in March 1814, Paris itself is surrendered by these members of the Allied coalition in March 1814. Following month in April, recognizing that defeat is really inevitable at this point, the idea box went off, Napoleon abdicates his throne. Okay? And the Allies capture him and exile him to the island of Elba. Elba's a small island in the Mediterranean, and Napoleon was given sovereignty over the island and allowed to remain with his title of emperor. But he attempted suicide on the island and failed. And he also learned while he was exiled that his ex-wife, right, he had divorced her and remarried a younger woman, but his ex-wife Josephine, who had helped him rise to power, had died, and he was completely devastated by the news, refused to leave his room for days. Napoleon's abdication and his exile on Elba allowed the British in 1814 to refocus their attention on the War of 1812 with the Americans. They redirected a lot of military resources to the United States to conduct a 3-pronged attack. One aimed at New York, coming down from the north from Canada, one in the Chesapeake Bay region, and one in the south at New Orleans in the War of 1812. But that war was over by January of 1815. And in the following month, in February of 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba with 700 men and landed in France and started heading north, recruiting men as he went north. Now, the coalition had put Louis the 18th on the throne, a descendant of the beheaded Louis the 16th, and he was very unpopular. So as Napoleon is moving north towards Paris, recruiting men as he's going, Louis the 18th flees to Belgium, knowing he's not going to have a lot of support. Napoleon was very popular. And Napoleon arrives in Paris, which has been vacated by Louis the 18th, on the 20th of March, and he governs in Paris for 100 days. And by June, he's got an army of 200,000 soldiers. Okay? And a coalition reforms against him, Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, and they field an army of about 150,000 men. And this is going to be the final battle in the Napoleonic Wars, a showdown between Napoleon and the Duke of Wellington of the British and the Prussian Prince Blücher. And this showdown with the British allied with the Prussians against Napoleon occurs on 18th of June, 1815. Okay? And it is a momentous day in which Napoleon is defeated, and even though he made several critical mistakes in that battle and may have defeated the British anyway, at the end of the day, the British were relieved by the arrival of the Prussians and who decimated and came in and reinforced the British, attacking Napoleon's right flank, and Napoleon was decisively defeated in the Battle of Waterloo. He retreated back to Paris, realized everything was over. He abdicates on the 22nd of June, and he is then exiled by the coalition on the island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean off the west coast of Africa. Napoleon spent the last 6 years of his life exiled under heavy guard on St. Helena, and he died in 1821. Following Napoleon's rise to power in Europe, which of course ends decisively in 1815, the great powers of Europe, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, all come together and they agree that, look, we have just been through this horrific, really generation-long struggle with France, and Europe has been torn apart. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to turn back the clock. We're going to restore all the Bourbon monarchy in France, for instance, and we're going to try to turn the clock back as much as we can to the status quo before the French Revolution. Okay, now they're not going to be able to do that, all right? But what they do agree on and what they do manage to do for a period of time is to establish within Europe a peace and a cooperative relationship between the main powers in Europe, okay? And so it's going to be a kind of an agreement among the elites to maintain power within each of these nations, but it's going to create a relatively peaceful situation in Europe for the rest of the 19th century, okay? That peace will eventually be broken, of course, with the First World War breaking out in 1918, but you'll hear about that more next year.